Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and we're talking about Avengers 200. Now, Avengers 200 is that book that's been raked over the coals, it's been burned, put over a hot flame every 6 months to show how progressive we are. Someone pulls out Avengers 200 and is like, "Hey, Avengers 200, how bad was it?" And then it was so bad, like that sort of thing, where it's just like it's almost a setup now, and to show that misogyny in comics, she was pregnant, this and the other. So let's get to the heart, because at the same time, I didn't have this book when I was growing up, but it was a book I saw, and I don't know if I saw it on the stands, but it was a book that I wanted, right? So at this time, Perez is on that, and at the same time, he was on Justice League of America. Now I got Justice League of America 200 that Perez did. It had multiple artists. It had excuse me, it had about like 14 to 15 Avengers in the book. It's really exciting. And, I said multiple artists already. So then I'm like, Avengers 200 has like the best Avengers cover ever. Why wouldn't that be good? Like, this is like, and I'm a big Byrne fan. And I'm like, let me think, there's probably, there's some good covers of the Avengers that Byrne did. But this is the ultimate cover. There's like 10 Avengers on the cover. It's a really gorgeous, like a moment, like a portrait of the Avengers, a great portrait by Pérez for the cover. So I bought it, and I was like, I don't know about this issue. I was kind of like, this isn't kind of what should have, that's the anniversary. And sometimes the anniversaries don't always hit, but this one was kind of really off. It was a wacky story about her. She was giving birth early into the story. Kid was growing up very rapidly. As everyone complains, the Avengers are kind of, like trying to be positive about the pregnancy and whatnot. Jen kind of says, "Why aren't you happy, Carol?" And then Miss Marvel kind of cuts her. She cuts her really deep. And then, of course, Jen apologizes. So this is the idea. In the story, you do have moments where the Avengers are kind of, showing some sort of understanding, but it's a hard sort of story to try to understand. At the end, even Iron Man says, "Hey, wait, this is kind of like a little much." And she's like, because it turns into a love story. It turns to someone giving birth, and then that child then becomes a romance that's off panel that we see the backstory of, which is not the best kind of romance to end the story of and have Miss Marvel leave the Avengers forever, go to limbo. It doesn't sound like a good idea that she's going to live in limbo. Like, it's limbo. And there's many limbos in Marvel, so it's kind of, I guess it's a time limbo, and then there's the one that the space fandom brings in. But that's what I was really iffy on. I was like, why are they going to limbo? That's really not the best place for someone who's lived, I think she was a reporter or something like that. She has a life in this world, to just sort of fall in love with this guy off panel. It's kind of wacky. So I didn't think much about it. I put it, and I finally got it. I kind of put it to the side and moved on. Now, I don't know when I got this, but at the same time, I got Avengers 10, which would be Chris Claremont's answer to that book. Now, I did like Avengers 10, but if we're talking about how misogynistic Avengers 200 is, then we got to go look at this one. It starts with Carol Danvers being tossed over off the Golden Gate Bridge, and only because Chris Claremont also writes Spider-Woman that she was there just in the nick of time to pull her out of the water. So it's like, what is going on here? Like, as much as I can say, oh, you dealt with the issue of the Avengers not doing that, but there's another issue that goes on. So if you look at it and you say, ultimately we're dealing with the issues, right? That the Avengers didn't stop her. Now, it didn't have to be written that way, because this is a classic thing that Chris Claremont does as far as writing, is saying, okay, I don't like this story. Let me punish these characters to say that they were at fault, and not find what we would say like what the no prizes were in the 80s, saying figure a way to make it make sense. And that's one of the harder things to do. So with that said, we have, let's see, with that said, I guess we should go to the issue, because I'm saying the Avengers Annual 10 is fun, but at the same time, Carol gets tossed off a bridge. And then at the same time, the Avengers get raked over hot coals because they screwed up when, you know, ultimately saying, hey, you guys are fictional characters and you're stuck in a bad story. You got to suffer for it. So, and that's, I guess that's what I'm saying. I would definitely discuss, we can't get past Rogue tossing Carol Danvers off a bridge and then try to explain it, because it doesn't work when you look at Avengers 10. It doesn't work at all. It's terrible. It's a terrible way to start the story. So that said, we got to go to Avengers 200 now. We're not going to deal with the annual, because everyone just goes to it and says, oh, that's so great. So we're not doing that. We're going to the tough one, Avengers 200. Now, Avengers 200, we have this here. As I said, I did not lie. Look at that cover. That is a great cover by Pérez, inked by Pérez. No, it's Austin. Terry Austin has inked this cover. It almost looks like Pérez is inking. But this is a good match of styles. You know, and ultimately, I think when I bought it at that point, I was into, like, I don't know, the sort of inking. So I probably wanted this inking for the inside. But, you know, that would probably be my first issue that I have with the book. So we're going to go in and we're going to look at the credits. Now, there's, of course, Marvel style is the plot comes first and then the script comes afterwards. So this time they have a group of people listed for the plot. So they are the actual storytellers, the writer, the person that came on afterwards to script it. So top billing is Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter gets the top billing for it. Pérez gets the, you know, he's there, Bob Layton, and David Michelini. Like, they are the writers, but let's remember, even Jim Salicrup is the editor. Jim Shooter is the plotter and or co-plotter, the first one listed in the plot, and then Jim Shooter is the editor-in-chief. This is the same Jim Shooter that looked at Death of Phoenix comic book and said no. So ultimately he could say no, things go wrong. We had to remember that. So with that said, let's go. Do I want to keep that there? I'll keep that there for now. Since in the Magic Age where everyone came down on this issue, and then Jim Shooter had a blog. Of course, Jim Shooter is like, you know what? I gotta attack this problem. I gotta say something about it. So in his blog, you know, his people contacted him, and he had a little bit to say about it. And here's his blog on Avengers 200 on it's jimshooter.com. That's simple. The book the screenplay that he wrote, and he said, here's what Jim had to say. I found my copy of Avengers 200. I read it. I agree with the consensus. It's heinous, but I don't remember much about how it got that way. I am credited not only as the editor-in-chief, but one of the co-plotters. However, I didn't see anything in the book that jogged my memory. No bits I remember suggesting, no corrections of the sort I might have made to the plot passed before me. Now, I did see many things I would have changed if I had seen the plot. Now we have to stop. We have to stop him right there, because there's no point in listening to what he would have done while he was on vacation, while this thing was going on, even though he co-plotted it, and somehow it passed through it passed through him without getting seen. But then the Death of Phoenix got saw and got fixed, or however you want to say, redone by Claremont and Byrne. So we can't factor in any of his assessments about what he would have done. All this stuff is talk about didn't approve plots. That would mean that, you know, he came up with the plot, and then of course he's editor-in-chief. Do you reject it? I don't know what you do. So next thing you know, he said, I guess I signed. That's all that matters. He said, so I guess I signed off on this book. I regret it. So next thing you know, it's like the buck stops at his desk. That's when he screwed up. These are important things to say. But then he says, maybe someone else can give some memories to it, and then he ultimately says his fault. So I don't like the middle of this blog where he kind of says what he would have done and kind of says, trying to explain to you what the co-plotters do. When Jim Shooter is the lead guy on there. So like, why would we pass? Why should we go to these other writers and plotters and discuss what they did? But with that said, with that said, there is a blog on, and now ultimately, this sort of plot in here. Well, that's another thing because the comic tropes, I think it's comic tropes. They did something on the Carol Danvers story, and they explained how Chris Claremont kind of did this before, and then he did the same resolution, being the mind rape in Avengers 10. So it's kind of like, how many times is this character going to go through stuff like this? Which is kind of sad. And it isn't a powerful moment. She does have a powerful moment with the Avengers and Avengers 10, but ultimately it's not a it's a sad thing for the character because she's someone who should be. You look at how powerful and how ultimately Spider-Man's powers could be pushed so he could fight he can fight the Hulk. Miss Marvel's powers should have been able to do all the same stuff because she has sixth sense, she has speed, strength, she is much stronger than Spider-Man, and then she also has a sixth sense. So and invulnerability. So you got all these things going for you. She should be like able to give the Submariner, the Hulk, last a couple of rounds with Thor or something like that. But no one really could see it that way. So anyway, so then I think there's also, I just listened to an interview with David Michelini, and he was talking about the Avengers plot. And that was recently, but he was kind of saying that it was the plot he wanted to do for that it was later. It was done by another editor. So once it was done by another editor, they were kind of scrambling to put together a plot. And ultimately, that's what Avengers 200 was, them kind of scrambling to get this plot together. And it wasn't what they originally wanted to do. And that was all he would say about it. He didn't throw Jim Shooter on the bus or Bob Layton or Pérez. But this is all present day. This story was done almost 40 years ago. 40 years ago. So we need an interview from that time, besides all of the stuff Chris Claremont has said about this. So, since I did something on Byrne and Pérez, I got this book here, which has an interview with George. And ultimately, he talked about this issue. So, in here, when I was doing another thing, is his Avengers, like basically most of the characters that were on the book while he was drawing it. And that would lead to another thing that I was thinking about. And he says, this is him coming back to the Avengers and say, getting that fresh start again also. The fact that it was leading into issue 200, which is a big, oh boy, another anniversary issue. So far, so far, every anniversary issue I had, something went wrong. Issue 150 was half reprint, as it turned out. Issue 200, I hated the story. David Michelini wasn't crazy about it. David Michelini wasn't crazy about it either. It wasn't his original story to begin with. So that's another tidbit. It wasn't David Michelini's story. Pérez hated the story, and Jim Shooter doesn't remember. He's doing his total, his Ronald Reagan impersonation. So, with that said, I don't know. Maybe we need Bob Layton to chime in, but ultimately, instead of going the other way and blaming Jim Shooter for most of it, let's just say the people credited are the people that were involved. we can't take away anything. I know Jim Shooter kind of said he didn't remember anything, so obviously, you know, he has no recollection how he got on the credits. But ultimately, we can't say he's not the writer, because David Michelinie is the scripter. The plot is hashed out before the art. So once the plot is hashed out and Jim Shooter, editor-in-chief, is there plotting with it, then that's the story you get. That's, if the editor, you say, then the buck stops with the editor. And of course, then they have to stop with the editor-in-chief too. Can't have someone who, the buck stops when the X-Men come through, but not the Avengers. So that said, ultimately, should we be complaining about Avengers 200 still? Like every sort of 3 months, someone does a Facebook post complaining about Avengers 200, or there's many, you know, YouTube blogs. Now, I've been on the other end. I complain about X-Men stories, right? But I'm saying, if we, I mean, it's almost argumentative bartering. If I say, if everyone's going to keep complaining about Avengers 200 and all this other stuff, then I can't give up the X-Men stuff. But ultimately, even with my complaints, we should be able to let things go. We should let these books, you know, as far as the monthly crunch, a bad apple comes out of the bunch. And ultimately, at some point, the X-Men would pick the wheels up and get better. Place around when Roger Stern is on the book, you know, because I think Shooter got on the book and it's kind of a rough stage. There's a lot of stuff that was questionable there. But, you know, kind of say, hey, sometimes these stories dip, sometimes they get better, they go up and down. So ultimately, we should all move on. And at the end, we can talk about it and say, that wasn't my cup of tea. That was just another one. When we go into the higher thing and saying this points out the misogyny in comic books, I think the way, I think by the time the 80s came along, all of those creators kind of, you know, I think with David Michelinie, what did he do? Bethany McCabe and Iron Man and Miss Arabelle, I forget, well, but mainly her. But they had positive female characters. Obviously, Pérez is definitely positive female characters. So all of them have grown past that point. Jim Shooter, I can't really call to a story, a specific story, but you know, he what was it? What would we be? I guess you can see some of the characters in what's that story? I guess I would have to say in Star Brand, like the divorcee with the kid in that story. I think her name would be Lindsay, I can't remember. But also the Ditsy character, who's my favorite, Debbie the Duck. So I mean, you have a character who no, that went south. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I can't say anything. I can't go to Fatale. I don't know what to add with Jim Shooter, but I mean, Jim Shooter is historically in history, he'll always be remembered for his Justice League and his early Avengers run, and definitely his other comics, and being a hand that kind of directed us to get to the Death of Phoenix. Not that he isn't credited, he didn't write it, but he kind of said, let's do this. And Vernon Claremont said, well, we'll do this. And we got a classic. So that's all I got for you. And I don't know, maybe you can check it out for the art or the cover, but still, no, that's, what did I say? We're going to look at that cover again. Sorry, y'all. Here we go. We're going to this issue, going like this. And then we got to get to that cover. Look at it. It is a gorgeous cover. I didn't remember that Terry Austin inked it, but I mean, look at it. Wouldn't you buy that? But anyway, that's it. That's all I got. Spinner Rack out.